For 8 long years, Brad Pitt barely said a word. While court battles exploded across headlines, while accusations spread online, while even his own children slowly stopped using his last name, he stayed silent. And that silence became its own kind of story. People filled it with rumors, assumptions, and endless speculation. But now, after all this time, he's finally spoken. And strangely enough, what he didn't say may matter even more than what he did. To understand why this silence became so powerful, you first have to remember what Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie once represented. They weren't just another celebrity couple. For years, they were Hollywood royalty. The couple everyone watched. Everyone talked about. Together, they seemed untouchable. Movie stars with global fame, humanitarian projects, 6 children, a massive French estate, and a relationship that looked almost cinematic every time cameras captured them. Brangelina wasn't just a nickname. It became a symbol of a modern Hollywood fairytale. But here's the thing about fairytales. Sometimes the ending is nothing like what people imagined. Their relationship began in controversy back in 2004 on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, while Pitt was still married to Jennifer Aniston. From the beginning, public opinion was divided. But despite the noise, Brad and Angelina built a life that looked remarkably real from the outside. They adopted children from Cambodia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam. They had 3 biological children together. Eventually, they bought Chateau Miraval in the south of France, a massive estate where they later married in a private ceremony in 2014. It looked like the kind of life nobody walks away from. Which is exactly why the collapse shocked the world so deeply. Because when something that big breaks apart, everyone wants to know why. Then came September 2016. Angelina Jolie filed for divorce, and suddenly the perfect image shattered overnight. At first, the official reason sounded familiar. Irreconcilable differences. But almost immediately, darker details started surfacing. Allegations. Reports. Stories about what had supposedly happened behind closed doors. And people began asking the same question. What could possibly destroy a family that seemed so solid from the outside? The answer, according to court filings, centered around one flight. A private jet traveling from France to Los Angeles on September 14, 2016. That flight would become the defining moment of one of Hollywood's most painful breakups. Jolie's legal team later claimed Pitt became aggressive before the family even boarded the plane. During the flight, filings alleged he verbally attacked Jolie, grabbed and shook her, and became physical during an argument. They also claimed one of the children stepped in to defend their mother, and that Pitt lunged toward the child. Reports described children crying and frightened on board. Pitt has always denied allegations of physical abuse. His legal team pushed back hard, calling the claims false and damaging. The FBI investigated the incident and ultimately filed no charges. Child Services in Los Angeles also investigated and took no action. But despite that, the damage was already done. Just days later, Jolie filed for divorce. And suddenly, the most famous couple in Hollywood was over. One flight. One night. One moment that changed everything. But was that really the full story? Because one terrible night doesn't explain 8 years of war afterward. What followed wasn't a clean celebrity split. It became a brutal legal marathon. 8 years of custody battles, lawsuits, leaked documents, accusations, counterclaims, and endless courtroom conflict. And while lawyers argued, the children grew older. Old enough to make their own choices. Choices that would eventually become some of the most heartbreaking parts of the entire story. One of the biggest fights centered around Chateau Miraval, the French winery where they had married and built family memories together. In 2021, Jolie decided she wanted to sell her share of the estate. In a letter that later became public, she described Miraval as a place that once held dreams of growing old together. But then she wrote something devastating. Miraval for me died September 2016. One sentence. And suddenly the winery stopped sounding like luxury property. It sounded like grief. Pitt's team argued Jolie sold her stake without proper consent. Jolie's side denied violating any agreement. The legal fight over the winery stretched on for years, becoming its own separate battlefield. At one point, Jolie's team also alleged Pitt wanted her to sign an NDA that would prevent her from publicly discussing alleged abuse claims. Pitt's side denied that characterization completely. Every development added more bitterness, more exhaustion, more distance between two people who once seemed inseparable. And finally, in December 2024, after 8 exhausting years, the divorce was officially settled. So after all that time, after all that silence, what did Brad Pitt finally say? In May 2025, Pitt sat down with GQ magazine while promoting his film F1. For the first time since the divorce officially ended, he was asked directly about it. People expected something explosive. Maybe a confession. Maybe regret. Maybe anger. Instead, what they got was surprisingly quiet. When asked whether finalizing the divorce brought relief, Pitt simply said, "No, I don't think it was that major of a thing. Just something coming to fruition. Legally." That answer hit people very differently. Some heard coldness. A man minimizing 8 years of pain and public destruction. Others heard something else entirely. Someone who had already emotionally processed the loss years earlier. Someone who had already grieved privately long before the paperwork ended publicly. And honestly, maybe that's why the response unsettled so many people. Because it didn't sound dramatic. It sounded tired. He also spoke openly about the nonstop attention surrounding his personal life. "My personal life is always in the news," he said. "It's been in the news for 30 years, bro." He called it an annoyance he had learned to live with. Then he said something that revealed more than people expected. "My life is fairly contained. It feels warm and secure with my friends, with my loves, with my fam, with my knowledge of who I am." Not exactly the explosive reckoning people waited 8 years to hear. But maybe something more revealing. A glimpse of someone trying to rebuild peace after years of chaos. But there's one area where peace still seems painfully far away. His children. Of everything that happened after the split, nothing appears more painful than the breakdown of Brad Pitt's relationship with his kids. He and Jolie share 6 children: Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, Knox, and Vivienne. And according to multiple reports, several of them either estranged from their father or maintain very limited contact. The clearest public sign came in 2024, when Shiloh legally removed Pitt from her surname after turning 18. She became simply Shiloh Jolie. Reports claimed Brad was deeply hurt by the decision. And she wasn't the only one. Zahara introduced herself publicly as Zahara Marley Jolie. Vivienne appeared in a Broadway playbill as Vivienne Jolie. Maddox has reportedly been distant from his father for years. One child changing their name might seem personal. Multiple children doing it starts to feel like a message. Sources close to Pitt say he still has some contact with the younger children, especially the twins. But overall, the picture remains difficult. A father grieving relationships he doesn't fully know how to repair. And maybe the saddest part is this: no court ruling can fix emotional distance. That takes time, trust, patience, and sometimes even that isn't enough. At the same time all of this was happening publicly, Brad Pitt was also dealing with something deeply personal behind the scenes. His sobriety. One part of this story that often gets overlooked is the amount of work Pitt says is done to change his life. Not for publicity, not for image repair, but because, by his own admission, something inside him had to change completely. In 2017, shortly after the separation, Pitt joined Alcoholics Anonymous. He later described the experience with unusual honesty. On Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, Pitt talked about AA meetings as emotional, raw, and deeply human. Men sharing failures, fears, mistakes, and vulnerability with honesty and humor. He admitted he was on his knees during that period of his life. He said he needed to wake the FCK up in some areas. Another phrase stuck with people even more. He said he needed rebooting. Not small adjustments. A total restart. According to people close to him, Pitt has now been sober for nearly a decade. Friends say the change is real. That he genuinely isn't the same person he was during the collapse of the marriage. And maybe that's part of what makes this story feel so complicated. Because personal growth doesn't automatically erase past damage. Becoming better later doesn't magically undo pain caused earlier. And that tension sits at the center of everything. Pitt has also spoken about accountability in a way that feels deeply personal. He once said, "No matter the mistake, you just learn from it and move on." It doesn't sound rehearsed. It sounds like something repeated quietly to yourself during long nights when nobody else is listening. Today, both Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie seem to exist in completely different worlds from the ones they lived in back in 2016. 8 years changes people. Children become adults. Wounds evolve. Lives reshape themselves around pain. When the divorce was finalized, Jolie's lawyer released a carefully worded statement saying Angelina had spent the past 8 years focused entirely on peace and healing for her family. The statement felt deliberate. Final. Like someone closing a door permanently without wanting to reopen it ever again. Interestingly, Jolie herself has avoided publicly dissecting the marriage in detail. She hasn't turned it into a media tour. Instead, she's mostly focused publicly on her children, her work, and her health. She appears beside her kids at premieres, school events, and public appearances. Quiet consistency instead of public commentary. And maybe that says more than interviews ever could. Meanwhile, Pitt's current life appears far quieter than the chaos that once surrounded him. Since 2022, he's been in a relationship with Ins de Ramon. Reports describe the relationship as calm, grounded, and healthy. They reportedly spend much of their time in Carmel, California, far from Hollywood's constant spotlight. Not the kind of place you move to for attention. The kind of place you move to disappear a little. To breathe. To live normally, as much as someone like Brad Pitt possibly can. Professionally, he's still fully invested in filmmaking, especially projects like F1, which insiders say became a major creative focus for him. But even with success, even with sobriety, even with peace slowly returning, some things remain unresolved. The truth is, nobody outside that family fully knows what happened behind closed doors. Nobody truly understands every private conversation, every regret, every wound. What we do know is this. Two people who once built one of the most admired relationships in the world spent nearly a decade trying to survive its collapse in completely different ways. And when Brad Pitt finally broke his silence after 8 years, he didn't give the world the dramatic confession people expected. He simply said the divorce was just something coming to fruition. Legally. Maybe that sounds cold. Maybe it sounds detached. Or maybe it sounds exactly like someone who already finished grieving long before the world stopped watching. Either way, the fairy tale ended a long time ago. What remains now are two people trying to build lives from whatever pieces survive the wreckage. And honestly, that may be the only real ending this story was ever going to have.